We're going to be talking about the art of forgiveness, which is possibly a good thing if you've been promising things for resolutions and decided perhaps not to do them. You can think about the art of forgiving yourself. But before we do that, let's start off saying hello to Jennifer.
Hello, I am Jennifer Jurkofsky with My Holistic Self Counseling. I am a registered psychotherapist, certified Canadian counselor, intuitive life coach in Ontario and Canada. And yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
Willie.
Hi there, I'm Willie Nicol, the cop turned coach. I help stressed out men get their lives and mojo back using a 90-day life change program. No psychobabble, no mumble jumble, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Angela.
Hi, I'm Angela, and I wear lots of interesting and varied different hats. When I'm here, I'm usually talking about kinesiology and coaching, and I love to help people wherever they're at right now to get to wherever they want to be. So whether that is just to put away the old stuff that doesn't serve them anymore, or whether they've got goals or ideals of where they want to get to in life, we can work towards that too. So yeah, just nice and gentle, clearing out the blockers and moving to where they want to be.
And I'm Leslie Marsh, and I'm a little bit of everything too. But then aren't we all? Because it's not just the one thing. Although they keep telling you one thing, only do one thing. Actually, we cover a lot of ground when we're doing therapies. And, most of us who are doing therapies start off with one, and then we get interested in other ones, depending on what we're doing. And that allows us to have a better idea of what's going on. So we kind of nurture ourselves into the idea of being able to help. And it kind of goes into the idea also of forgiveness, which is the topic tonight, in case you hadn't figured that one out already. So the art of forgiveness, because actually it is an art. And it's something that we're going to be discussing. So when it comes to forgiveness, there are many, many people who still think it's not about them, it's about the other one. It's about the one who's made them unhappy, hurt them. And how dare they? And they don't even seem to be sorry about it. So how would I choose to forgive them? Actually, it's more about the individual who is hurt than it is at any other thing. Jennifer, what do you say?
I couldn't agree more. We talk about forgiveness, and a lot of people, forgiveness is quite a triggering word. A lot of people hear forgiveness and they go, no, I don't even want to talk about that. I don't want to go there. And there's a lot that comes up when we talk about forgiveness. And yet, if we really break it down, it's about our ability to release the control that the other person has over us because of what we're holding on from what happened. And so the more that we're able to step into that place of forgiveness, the more we actually take our power back. And we're honoring what we need in those situations. And so to be able to have that kind of paradigm shift around forgiveness can be hugely empowering in our process.
Yeah, otherwise you're living rent free in your head.
Yes.
Angela.
It's an interesting one because I think it's that forgiveness and forgetting are two different things. So while you can forgive an act or forgive a hurt or forgive a wound to allow you to move forwards, doesn't mean you're going to forget the act. And it doesn't mean that you have to forget, because we don't learn if we forget. We need to remember what's happened and then use that learning or that remembering to decide what we're going to do next time. And if we keep doing the same things over and over, we're going to keep getting into the position where there's that need to forgive, or that feeling of a need to forgive, or the guilt trip into forgiving for the same thing over and over again. And I think there is that we don't have to forget, but the forgiveness is the gift to ourselves, not necessarily a gift to the other person.
It's that separation, isn't it, Willie? Allowing yourself to separate the two.
Many years ago, the philosopher Alexander Pope said, To err is human, to forgive is divine. And people have interpreted that as meaning that other people will make mistakes, and you make allowances for these mistakes and forgive them. That is in some way veering towards divinity. I'm not sure I agree with that, but having the kindness, if you like, to forgive other people for any slights or transgressions they've made against you, real or imagined, is a big thing. It's part of being human. So if you're a big enough person, if you like, to forgive someone who's done something unpleasant to you or bad to you, that is a sign to me of progress and growth and development.
Also, sometimes we don't actually know we've done something to upset someone else, because it usually happens all in here.
Mhm.
And it's how we hear what's going on. I suddenly understood at one point that when texts were all done in capitals, someone was shouting at you. And so I said something to someone, and she said, "Oh, sorry, I didn't realize the capitals were on." I thought, okay, that explains that then. However, there is a lot to do with self-responsibility, taking responsibility for the action. And understanding that, I mean, I don't know how many times I've heard it, particularly in our culture where we are. It's a case of forgive. I don't bloody think so, and it's like, I'll never forgive them, not even if, after I'm dead, I'll haunt them, not forgiving them kind of thing. Well, actually, that's strangling their own self-awareness and their own forward progress. Because it's like this never-ending circle that goes on inside. So how do we break that, Angela?
For some people with great difficulty, for some people with great ease. And I think it really depends on who you are as a person and where you want to get to. So do you want to be constantly sitting in a position where, exactly as Howard said, they're taking up rent in your head for free? You don't want that negative thought in your head. And if you keep delving on that negative thought or whatever it is, you're never going to move forwards and you're going to get stuck. How you do it, it's different for everybody.
Mm. Mm. It is different for everybody, and it's also something that becomes almost part of them. It's part of their story. It makes their story. And it's something that a lot of the time people can keep putting out this story because it gives them attention to a certain extent. Oh, you poor so and so. That was such a shame. How are you getting on now? But eventually, when we hear the same story all the time, that attention gets less and less and less. And eventually we're like, can you not just go over this now? It's about, tell me something new. Because that record, there's blood there, you know? So it is something of the human condition, particularly in the modern world, that we have time to sit and mither on it. Jennifer.
Mm. It's so true. And when we dive into that aspect of forgiveness, we begin to understand that ultimately all forgiveness turns into self-forgiveness.
Mhm.
We're forgiving ourselves for what we're harboring. We're forgiving ourselves for all of the things that we're carrying that don't belong to us. We begin to forgive ourselves for beating ourselves up, for carrying it, right? There's many layers here, but it always comes back to my relationship. And you're talking about taking responsibility, right? What was my role in how I felt in that situation? And so often we come back to this place of, I actually need to forgive myself for taking on this and allowing it to, I'm continuing my own torture as I go through this process. When you talk about the how, one of the beautiful practices that I absolutely love is the Ho'oponopono, right? The Hawaiian healing prayer for forgiveness. And it's so simple. And, people will use it for others. But ultimately, if you really dive into the practice, it's about self-forgiveness and really changing our whole perception of it. And it's four simple lines, and it's beautiful. It's, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you. And just allowing yourself to have that state right? Where we're bringing in, that apology. And again, it's often to ourselves. I'm so sorry that I held on to this. I'm so sorry that I judged myself for this. I'm so sorry that I carried this for so long, right? Please forgive me. And we're forgiving the parts of ourselves that held on, right?
Yeah,
And
that
then
goes back to talking about being in the aspect of the divine, because particularly in Ho'oponopono, we are part of the divine. Everything is our responsibility, because if there's a problem, that's where we are. We're there. So we're there in order to take responsibility for it. So in taking responsibility for it, we can make that idea of forgiveness through self-compassion, through understanding that there must have been something going on, that's making something happen inside me, an action reaction situation, and understanding that by using that prayer, if you want to call it prayer, or that saying, or whatever it is that you want to call it, those words are very powerful. And people are quite wary of them, particularly, the I love you. Do I want to say that? Do I really? I'm not sure. But then again, we're so separated from the idea of love as an aspect, not just as a hallmark moment. Or oh, I love that. Did you see that program last night? Brilliant. Because so many different layers to it. But again, the responsibility and the self-compassion coming in. That's
I
a
can
new
give
edge
you,
that I think.
sorry, I can give you a personal example of this, and it kind of changed with divinity. I'm not a particularly religious man or a spiritual man. God and I fell out a long time ago. However, I do believe there's something bigger than us. So I may have said that my wife and I visit Glastonbury, which is a very spiritual place down in the southwest of England. And one year when I was there, quite early on in our travels there, we went to a little chapel. Not something I frequent frequently, but anyway, in this lovely little chapel, beautifully done out, tiny, very, very peaceful, very, very calm. And nowadays people sit about, there's only room for about a dozen people. They sit about and they meditate or they think or whatever. And I was sitting there, kind of zoning out, having random thoughts. And one the random thought came in and said, all these people you did something bad to, Willie, and I have done some bad things. Not murdered anyone, but I've done some bad things I'm not proud of. I wonder if they've forgiven you. And in a flash, the thought came into my head, have you forgiven yourself? And I had paused in shock. Have you forgiven yourself? And I realised in that flash that I hadn't. That it didn't matter whether they'd forgiven me. I hadn't forgiven myself for doing what I shouldn't have done. So self-forgiveness, hugely powerful. You can't change the past. As the old saying is, the past is a foreign country. They do things differently there.
Mm.
It's gone. You can maybe atone for it, but you can't change it. Therefore, you have to accept what you've done and move forward. And that includes self-forgiveness. And finally, particularly as a man, looking at yourself in the mirror and saying, I love you. Quite tricky. And when I say that to clients, they kind of look at me. And I explain it by saying, if you don't love yourself, how do you have the capacity to love other people? So start with yourself. Start with getting rid of all your shit. Love yourself for who you are, what's and all. And once you've got to that place, you're then in a much more powerful position to love other people. And for that matter, forgive other people, even if they've done something bad to you. Because again, what can you do about it? It's done. It's in the past. Accept it. Move on.
Yeah, I use the I am loved with my clients, so that because a lot of people don't feel worthy of it, so getting them to look in the mirror eye to eye, because we don't look in the mirror unless it's to look at a blemish or to see that our hair's in the right place or that we haven't put our lipstick up round our left eyebrow. And so in order to do that, actually to look yourself in the eye and continually say, I am loved, until you get a significant emotional response. And that happens, it'll start off with the, oh, this is just ridiculous. What am I doing this for? That Leslie Marsh is totally off her nut. Why am I doing this? So I tell them that that's going to happen. But then if they keep going, there will be that significant emotional reaction and response. And I think that part of it that they don't realize is what's happening inside them biochemically when they do that. Because all that we're doing, all this stuff with the cortisol and the dopamine and the thing and the thing and the thing, all these chemical trails that are running about our brains, getting flushed into our bodies, sometimes coming back up from the kidneys, because it does. And it all becomes part of the soup that our brain is trying to work out and look at and be in that state. And eventually, if we're doing that long enough, it becomes a state that it's called homeostasis, that the body recognizes as normal. Which can be why it's so difficult to get ourselves outside of that and go back to a place where we've changed the bar, we've lowered the bar and balanced ourselves down. Because our body's sort of, hang on a minute. No, we like it when you do this. We don't like it when you're calm and you're doing this, because who are you when you're doing that? We don't know this. But eventually, of course, that is running our engine down and it's making us ill. So self-compassion and taking responsibility for it is actually a healthy option. And it's interesting to me that the fact that love is something that probably could be on the dietary list when it comes to your health and welfare. What do you think, Angela?
It's an interesting one, just with Willie seeing a lot of guys have that difficulty. It surprised me just how many women struggle with it too. And I've done affirmations with clients before, and actually I was working with someone who I was training with, so doing a lot of the similar therapies. And I love me, or I love you as you look in a mirror, was something that came up for this particular client. The words would not pass her lips. So it was so ingrained that it was such a foreign concept, or that she was completely unlovable, even for herself, that she physically couldn't say the words. And that horrified me from a perspective of I really wanted to help my client, and I couldn't understand why she couldn't see in herself what I saw in her. But it is that way that we don't know what's going on in someone else's head. We don't know what perspective they've got of themselves. And it's such a difficult one to guess just by looking at someone how they feel about themselves and whether they could say these words or not. And it's as I said, it was very early on in my training, so it was just mind-blowing that this was what was coming up. And I think a big part of when it's looking at forgiving other people and loving other people is remembering that what you're maybe forgiving somebody for, or whatever's going on, for how they made you feel. They didn't make you feel anything. You make you feel. We get to choose what emotions we want to express. We get to choose how we want to feel. And once you get that locked into your psyche, life gets a lot easier. But getting to that point as well can be a huge challenge. So not only have you got to learn to love yourself, you've got to learn that you're responsible for how you feel and nobody else.
And it's good to remember also that when you do kind of fall down on that one, forgive yourself for it and just get on with it and do it again.
Yeah. It's okay to feel sad or unhappy or upset. Just don't stay there. But forgive yourself if you're starting to beat yourself up. Yeah, forgive yourself. And I think as I'm sure Elsa's behind me, let it go. Channel your inner Disney princess, or Disney queen actually, isn't she? And yeah, let it go.
I think there's another element to this, that if someone does you a bad turn, as we say in Scotland, and you forgive them, and then a third party said, you forgave them? Oh, I would never have forgiven that. you must be nuts, right? And I say, well, maybe we're different, right? So forgiveness may have a third party element to it. Should I forgive this person? What will other people think of me if I forgive them for their transgression? Will that make me look weak,
Yeah.
soft, whatever? And that could be a barrier or an impediment to forgiving someone. But we should have the strength of character to say, I don't care what other people think. I'm forgiving them. That's the way it is. It's done. It's history. And if that third party doesn't like it, well, tough.
Yeah,
And I
it's
guess
like
that comes back to that point that you might forgive them, but you've not forgotten the act, and you may not allow them to do that to you again, depending on what it was. You may be a bit more reluctant to accept things in future.
No, you get one chance, as it were, right? You're forgiven, right? Don't do it again.
Yeah. It's a boundary thing to a certain extent. It's understanding that, because a lot of the time the insult to our beliefs and values is a surprise, because a lot of the time they're so deeply ingrained and automatic, we don't actually have a list saying, oh yes, today my beliefs and values will be. And if somebody stands on it and say, oh well, you didn't know because you didn't see the list, you know. But somebody comes up and does something, and it's a case of, well, in Scotland, if you turn the other cheek, somebody else will whack the other one. So it is one of those things that when we realise that, that upset me. Where did I hold that? Where did that come from? And then, if I don't want that to happen again, then I really need to set boundaries and make sure that people, I don't have to say, this is my boundary, keep away, keep off the grass kind of thing, barbed wire and all that, carry on. But I need to be able to let people know by my demeanour, by the way I speak to them and how I act on things, that won't be tolerated. And I don't mean I'm going to go and hit you or something like that. What I mean is, you won't be part of my circle anymore. Because I don't want to be responsible for your stuff. I think it's interesting that in the Ho'oponopono situation, I think it's Huan Lee, Dr. Huan Lee, who did that experiment. Well, he didn't do an experiment, he actually did something in a Hawaiian hospital at one point where these really, really mentally ill and dangerous people were all, over a period of time that he worked there, improved and got better and were moved into less secure areas and shackles taken off them, etc. The interesting thing about it is, though, he never saw any of them. He was taking responsibility for what was in him that was causing them the issue. And he was doing his, I love you, I'm sorry, forgive me, thank you. And he calls it cleaning and clearing. So the more that happened, and I think it's got a lot to do with energy. Everything's got to do with energy. So the more energy that's going out there in that way, the more it becomes osmotically the balancer. And I think that basically when we get into a stage where it's very easy, as we know psychologically, it's very easy to get into a mob style fight when somebody else starts something and it rings up something inside you. Well, you'll know about this because you'll have been at places like that, in situations like that, where somebody's done something, knocked somebody, and they don't want to take it. There's something going on with them that they're really not happy that happened, and they'll lash out or they'll start screaming at somebody. And then it just escalates from there. And that energy has just caught fire.
Yes, I've been in many situations like that, Leslie, during my police career.
Yes.
Where it all, as they say in our neck of the woods, it all kicks off. I was also thinking about if someone does you a bad turn, right, and you're kind of slithering, as we say in Scotland, about whether to forgive them or not, you take time to pause and think, why did they do that? What does that show up in me? What's my contribution to the insult or the threat or the bad mouthing that might occasion the question about forgiveness or not. So before we say, oh, okay, you're forgiven, it's okay, pause to think about what went on there. What was my contribution to this unpleasantness or this disagreement? And think about yourself. And then we say, well, okay, I'm blameless in this. I was unprovoked, it was unwarranted. So then, yeah, I've not contributed to it. Then you can say, well, will I forgive them or not? And unless it's something particularly nasty, you say, yeah, why not? Because forgiving people is not a sign of weakness. Well, it's perceived that as that by someone else. It's a sign of strength, strength of character. Yeah, I'm the big enough person to forgive that slight or insult or whatever it is, because that's what I am. And then I'm going to forget all about it. I let's do it again and move on, end of, turn the page, all that kind of malarkey.
Yeah, I think people are worried that they're going to get taken a loan of.
You might have to explain that to Jennifer.
Oh yeah, yeah. You take a loan of somebody, that means that you take advantage.
Kind of thought that might have been what it meant.
Every so often we speak a different English language.
Yeah. Well, and I think that comes back to, what you all were already talking about and Angela had brought up is that difference between forgiving and forgetting, right? When we talk about forgiveness, we can forgive somebody for something that they've done. In the same process, we forgive ourselves for not setting the boundary or for overstepping our own boundary, allowing somebody to overstep it, right? Or just not honoring what we need in that moment. That forgiveness doesn't negate the boundary. It just means that we're allowing ourselves to take back that control and that power within so that we can then honor that moving forward, right? There's a shift that happens where, you say something that, really, hurts me or that I feel is not okay. To forgive that is, okay, maybe there wasn't awareness there. Maybe there was awareness and it was meant to be hurtful. Whatever the situation is, if I carry that, I'm just continuing to hurt myself. And I'm also not setting a boundary, right? So we talk about that piece of getting walked on or taking advantage of. We're allowing that to continue when we don't make a change, right? And by being able to forgive both ourselves and the other, we set a new precedent where we can do something different moving forward. But if we stay in that powerless place, what are we going to do different? What are we going
Yeah,
to actually?
I think the interesting word there was control. Because we are at the controls, really. We just forgot to remember that. We're letting somebody else drive the bus at that point. Angela.
It just makes me think of I'm on a Disney track today, right? So you've got the Inside Out films where you've got that control panel of all the different emotions or the different little characters that are driving your controls and driving you to do what you're doing. So whether it's joy or sadness or happiness or in the new film anxiety. Who do you want to have in the driving seat? Do you want to have despair and distrust and all the negative, horrible, yucky feelings in the driving seat? Or do you want to have calm or stillness or love or joy or whatever else in that driving seat? And you're not going to always have just the one. There will be a blend of them and they'll swap over from time to time. But yeah, it's who is controlling you.
I
Which
started
part
to
of
think
you
about
is in
Eeyore
the
there.
driving seat?
I was just
Okay.
thinking about Eeyore.
Okay.
Somebody's stolen my thistles. Yeah, it's an interesting situation. Eeyore was the poster guy for being walked on and taken a loan of, wasn't he, really? Because he was taking a loan of himself most of the time.
That the donkey.
Yeah.
Like, I was going to say that.
He was always depressed.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the thing about it is, you can choose, you can control who's going to be in the driver's seat. If you want to be miserable, be miserable. If you don't want to be miserable, change it. Right? Now, snapping your fingers doesn't cure that, but there are ways. Obviously, we know that you can change that state. You can change that mindset. If you want to wallow in despair, right, well, good luck to you. Right, but you get to
Not
choose.
going to be a fun place.
Now, it's not a fact
Yeah.
place, right? You get to choose what emotion or what feeling or what thoughts for that matter, are driving the bus or driving your life, or whatever it happens to be, right? So that's what a lot of people forget. You've got the choice. You're in control of you. Other people will try and control you. And I had an element of control where I could arrest people, right? So that was the way it went. But you're in control of you. Sometimes I forget that. Wait a minute, Willie, circumstances are not, yes, there are circumstances that can affect you, but they don't control you. The only thing can control you is you. And we forget that very often. And we allow ourselves to get into a miserable state or whatever it happens to be. And you think, just by thinking differently, I can change my whole attitude, my whole outlook, because you have the choice.
It's interesting you say that because I'm just recognizing some of the things that I do when I see dogs, particularly because they're the most common animal that I would see these days. But every so often there's an elephant coming around the corner, and there's like an automatic switch that I go from oh, it's a lovely day to, oh, look at you. Oh my goodness, you're gorgeous. Oh my goodness. And it's the only time you'll probably ever hear that out of me.
Yeah, and it's quite a thing to watch.
Yeah. Yeah. So interestingly enough, because of the way I had myself wired at the time, when I was a vet nurse, I was talking to a cat like that in the back, and one of the vets came up behind me and said, "I knew you were human. I knew you had a heart." And I didn't even bother turning around. I just said to him, "You don't have 4 legs and fur. I wouldn't bet my life on that if I were you." And it is a control mechanism.
Protection, isn't it?
It is protection, and it's boundary keeping. It's don't cross my boundary because I'm here for one specific thing, and you are not that species. So there's a few things that have happened in previous career that I found very, very hard to forgive because it was so hurtful. And it's kind of gone into like Willie said, doesn't matter because it's in the past now. It's done. There's nothing we can do about it once it's done. We cannot do it again, but there's nothing we can do about it once it's done, except for change the way that we think about it.
And the way we feel about it.
Yeah. Yeah. All those runaway horses with those emotional jockeys on them. We have to kind of corral them in and figure out where we want to put the jockeys. So, yeah, it is interesting. But it's also this, like Willie was saying earlier, about you're no strong person. You're not, you've got no character if you forgive somebody. But actually, it can be the hardest thing to do for someone. It can be very hard to do, particularly when it has hit really hard. But it can be the slightest thing. And sometimes the other person isn't even aware of it. I mean, Angela has to tell me when I'm shouting. Because sometimes when I'm getting very involved in what I'm doing or what I'm saying, and it's very important to me to try and kind of get it out there, everything squeezes in, and of course the voice just gets louder and louder and louder.
It's not just capital letters, it's the whole thing. But I do have to remind you now and again about your indoor voice. But it's interesting, those little things that can cause you to fly off the handle. Think about when you're out driving and if somebody cuts you up, what are the responses you can have? What are the extreme responses where you're effing and blinding at the fact that this person had the audacity to do this and how dare they do this to me? And they maybe just didn't see you. Maybe they're in a rush. Maybe they're distracted because they're trying to get somewhere to deal with something pretty horrific. But they possibly just didn't see you. What do we then take on board from that interaction?
Perception. I used to drive quite a lot in my previous job after time for the police, and I did get cut up one day. And 2 years later, I was still fuming about it. And when I walked into the house, my wife, who's very perceptive, said, "What's wrong with you?" "Nothing at all." She says, "Come on, what's wrong with you?" And I told her, 2 years ago, this guy cut me up. And she called me a very rude word.
Mhm.
And then said, idiot. And she was quite right. I was an idiot for harbouring that for 2 hours, fulminating all the way back home. And yeah, I was an idiot. But I think there's an element of perception here, right? Someone can say something which you perceive to be unpleasant and think, well, I've never forgiven them for that. And they had no intention whatsoever of insulting you. You perceive that to be the case. Or they might have been clumsy, but they had no intention to hurt you. So before you start blaming and whatever, before you even get to forgiveness, as I said earlier, have a wee stop and think, did they really mean that? Was that just a clumsy way of putting things? And put yourself in their shoes. Most of the time we can tell where something's insulting or rude or whatever. But often I can say things to my lovely wife and she'll get quite annoyed about it. And I thought, what have I done wrong? And you said it this way, did I? Or you said these words, did I? So you have to kind of stop a wee bit and think about it. And put yourself in their shoes. And maybe they're frustrated. Maybe they've had a shit day. Maybe their boss has chewed them out, right, and they've snapped or whatever. And you say, well, I can forgive that because we've all been there. Like, we've all had a shit day, the boss chewed you out, whatever it is. I can forgive that. And then we go back to our thing. You've forgiven them? Oh, I don't think so. You must be a pussy or something like that. You must be just a wee soft fluffy bunny. No. I've put myself in their place. I thought, yeah, that could happen to me. So there we are.
And I
I can
guess
tell you, but
that's Leslie's comment as well. When Leslie starts to get a bit het up and she's shouting at me, it's for me to not realize, or for me to realize she's not shouting at me. She's just
I'm
forgotten
shouting
she's
at
got an
me.
indoor voice. Well, it's not.
Mhm.
It's not even that. Sometimes you just get excited, so you start shouting.
Yeah,
But
I'm shouting at me.
it is. How do I perceive that? Am I perceiving it as she's really getting fed up with me, and I'm really upset now because she's shouting at me because I've done something, or is it actually that's just her? That's how she's expressing herself, and it's got nothing to do with me whatsoever.
Mhm.
Most of the
If
time.
we if we take it even a little bit further, right? Let's say the person is just being mean. Let's say the driver is just being entitled. Let's say it is just what we seem it to be. We can still forgive them because the forgiveness, again, if we recognize that it's about us and what we want to hold and what we want to harbor, we notice that whatever comes out of us is what we're holding. Sorry, the computer like that. Um, and so what ends up happening is, there's a story that's gone along social media, and I'm sure, many of you may have seen it, but it talks about the cup of coffee, right? And somebody bumps into you and you spill your coffee, and they say, well, why did you spill your coffee? Most of the time, people are going to go, well, I spilled my coffee because somebody bumped into me. And it's like, no, you spilled coffee because coffee is what was in your cup. If you had tea in your cup, you would have spilled tea. If you had water in your cup, you would have spilled water, right? When we get bumped into by life, by people, by experiences, what spills out of us is what we're holding. And we have to remember that. And so if what spills out of us is anger, frustration, annoyance, it's not because somebody bumped into us. It's because we're holding that, right? And that's what we have to forgive.
And sometimes the reason that we're holding that is because that's how we were domesticated. That's how we were when we were young sponges, as children always are. That's how we saw the normality of life. In that when you get excited, you raise your voice. When you get this, you start shouting. When you do this or someone does that, you swear. Actually, swearing is quite good for pain management, strangely enough. So it does have its place. Well, I think that again has got to do with the energetic response.
It's also a term of endearment for a lot of people in Scotland as well, isn't it? Swear
Oh
words.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I used to know someone who used to use that as a wonderful descriptive, and it was the F word. And he was Austrian, and his hands would do this. He was saying it was so effing brilliant, and it was so this, and it was the only way that he could tell someone how
Express
really,
himself.
really, really good it was. But actually, a word is just a word until we get hold of it.
It's what you associate with the word,
Hmm.
right? And different words have different associations. And you can either be offended by it or be amused by it or whatever. And I'm reminded of when somebody does you a bad turn, I've done before, you say, I will never forgive them. I will hold that grudge until the day I die, as you articulated, Leslie, right? And it's a kind of, it's somebody's warm fuzzy feeling, holding a grudge. You can grit yourself with that grudge, yeah?
Nursing your ire.
Is it helping you? Is it developing you? Is it making you feel better? No, but I'm just going to hold on to it. And Jennifer says, you hold on to it. Right. Grudges are pointless. Absolutely pointless. Hold a grudge. Who's been damaged by that holding of the grudge? Not the person you hold the grudge against. It's your good self that's been damaged. So another little piece of advice would be let go of your grudges.
Yeah, that actually is true what you say there. Because when you're holding a grudge, you rearrange your life around that grudge. You don't go places. You don't talk to people who would be associated with the grudgee or the grudge. You know, are you the grudger or the grudgee? And it's like, what on earth? It was a word. It's gone. It's transmuted itself into another energy somewhere else. You
But
don't
you
have to
build it
catch
out
it
to
to hold it.
bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and you put these protection bubbles around yourself and make it even bigger. And now you can't walk through a door because you're carrying so much grudginess. How is that living?
The grudge factor. Now there's a thing.
No, that's not next month's episode.
No, I was thinking about writing a blog about it or something. Yeah, it's the thing is that we very, very rarely think about giving ourselves a break. We very, very rarely, because we're taught not to. We have to give, not receive. We have to be the one who loves, not the one who is loved. How the hell we get along at all amazes me sometimes, because there's so many different minds that we could step on. But at the same time, we just got to give ourselves a break and get
Exactly.
on with it.
Who's our worst critic?
We are.
Exactly. So I say to clients, give yourself a break. Or if you've got success, pat yourself on the back. Self-congratulations is a bad thing. You've done something. You've achieved something.
Andrew's fantastic at criticising himself. I don't have to say anything. I don't have to say anything. He does it all himself. And he says, "Oh, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking da 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 da." And I
But
go,
Leslie,
"Actually, I wasn't."
you do have very good facial expressions when it comes to these things, though. So I can
Yeah, but
understand where your poor husband gets all these
I'm not even in the
thoughts
same
from.
room sometimes, and he's doing it. Honestly, it's like, she won't like that, so I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do that, and I'm going to do the other. And I'm like, why? What? And he's like, "Oh, but and I said, it doesn't matter, eh?" But
But
it
does he
totally
know it
throws
doesn't
him.
matter?
It totally throws him. But then again, he goes into the nth degree. He'll go from 0 to 1,000 in 0.2 of a second when it comes to what he thinks will be the outcome and the variables of those outcomes.
But then
And it's
are
you.
you fanning those flames and helping him get there?
Oh, I don't have to. I think it's because he sees how I am in like, well, he married me, so he can't be that bad.
So he's forgiven you then?
I'm not entirely sure about that. Think to think, really, I'm a little angel.
Unless she's shouting at you.
Well, even when I'm shouting at you, it could be because I love you. I mean, I did actually say that to one of my bosses when he said that I was so rude. And I said to him, "Listen, where I come from, if they don't put you in hospital on a Saturday night, they don't love you." And that gave him a little time of a head scratching.
We might need to do a bit more work on you, Leslie.
Oh, that was in the past. But I remember the reaction it got, and I kind of noted it for future reference. That'll be the writer in me. But yeah, so self-compassion, releasing, letting go, understanding that we can review, but we don't have to recite the same situation all the time. There are some things that are heinous. Yes, they are. But they are usually somebody else's wounds and their stuff that we are mirroring. And a lot of the time, when we are mirroring, it's because there is something in us that has that little capacity for being rude, for being tense, for being terse, which means losing your temper. So think about it. And I think what we're all saying today is this new year, give yourself a break, allow yourself some compassion, and remember to forgive, because it actually is very good for your health.